The rain fell in a steady drizzle over Seattle, Washington, cloaking the city in a gray mist that seemed to mirror Ethan Caldwell's mood. From the expansive windows of his mansion perched on the hills of Queen Anne, the 38-year-old tech billionaire gazed out at the blurred skyline. Puget Sound stretched in the distance, its waters restless under the autumn clouds. Once Ethan would have been out there commanding boardrooms or scaling the rugged peaks of the Cascade Range, his name synonymous with innovation and ambition. Now confined to a sleek, custom-built wheelchair, he was a prisoner in his own body, his legs lifeless since a climbing accident 6 months ago. The fall had shattered more than his spine. It had broken his belief that money and influence could conquer anything. He'd spent millions on the best neurologists, surgeons, and rehabilitation programs from Seattle to Switzerland. But the verdict was unanimous: paralysis below the waist permanent. His empire, built on AI-driven logistics software, continued to thrive under his remote direction. But Ethan felt like a ghost haunting his own life. His days were a cycle of sterile routines, meetings via video calls, physical therapy that yielded no progress, and the hollow sympathy of those who dared to visit. His assistant, Mason Harper, and his bodyguard, Clara Voss, were his only constants, their loyalty a reminder of the life he'd once led. Today, though, Ethan had insisted on leaving the mansion. "I need air," he'd told Mason, his voice sharp with frustration. The truth was, he needed to escape the suffocating silence of his home where every polished surface reflected his failure. Mason arranged for them to visit Pike Place Market, a bustling hub where Ethan could blend into the crowd, or so he hoped. Clara drove the black SUV through the rain-slicked streets, her stoic presence a quiet reassurance. Mason sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through emails on his tablet, occasionally glancing back at Ethan with a mix of concern and professionalism. The market was alive with color and noise vendors shouting about fresh salmon, tourists snapping photos of the iconic fish-throwing spectacle, the scent of coffee and baked goods mingling with the salty tang of the waterfront. Ethan's wheelchair glided smoothly over the cobblestones, Clara pushing him with practiced ease. They settled at an outdoor table under a canopy at a small cafe, the kind that served overpriced lattes and pastries to tourists. Ethan ordered a black coffee and a croissant, more out of habit than hunger, and stared at the untouched plate as the rain pattered on the canopy above. The crowd moved around him, a blur of faces and voices, none of whom noticed the man in the wheelchair, whose name had once graced the covers of Forbes and Wired. Ethan preferred it that way. Attention now felt like pity, and pity was a knife to his pride. He was about to signal Clara to leave when a small figure approached his table. She was a girl no older than 7, with dark braids and a simple green dress that looked clean but worn, the kind of outfit that suggested care, but not wealth. Her eyes, a striking hazel, locked onto his with an intensity that made Ethan pause. She wasn't a beggar. Her posture was too confident, her gaze too direct. Without a word, she pointed at the untouched croissant on his plate and said, "Give me your leftovers and I'll teach you how to walk." Her voice was clear, almost commanding, cutting through the market's din like a bell. Ethan froze, the words so absurd they felt like a punch. A dry, humorless laugh escaped his lips, the first he'd managed in months. "Kid, you've got some nerve," he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a leather wallet, and peeled off a few $100 bills, tossing them onto the table. "Take this and go buy yourself something. I'm not in the mood for games." But the girl Lily, as she later introduced herself, didn't even glance at the money. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, unyielding, as if the cash were as irrelevant as the rain pooling on the cobblestones. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice steady but soft, like she was stating a fact. "I want the leftovers. Give them to me, and I'll teach you to walk." The laughter died in Ethan's throat. He looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her eyes that unsettled him. Not naivety, not pity, but an unshakable certainty. It was the kind of conviction he'd once had back when he believed he could bend the world to his will. For 6 months, he'd been drowning in despair, surrounded by doctors who spoke in percentages and impossibilities, and charlatans who promised miracles for a price. He'd heard every pitch: stem cell therapies, experimental surgeries, even a shaman from some remote village who claimed to channel healing spirits. But this, a child, demanding his half-eaten croissant for a chance to walk. It was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard, and yet something about her refused to let him dismiss it. Behind him, Mason leaned forward, his voice low. "Boss want me to handle this? She's just a kid, probably scamming tourists." Clara, ever silent, shifted her weight, ready to step in. But Ethan raised a hand, stopping them both. "No," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "Stay put." He didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was the monotony of his days, the endless parade of experts who'd failed him. Maybe it was the way Lily stood there, unafraid, her small frame radiating a quiet power. Or maybe it was the flicker of a memory, his childhood dream of sailing across the Pacific, the wind in his hair, the horizon endless before him. That dream had died on that mountainside, along with his ability to walk. But now this strange girl was offering him something no one else had, not a cure, not a promise, but a challenge. The cafe seemed to fade around them. The chatter of the market, the clink of cups, the distant cry of seagulls, all of it melted into a low hum. Ethan and Lily locked eyes, and in that moment something shifted. He saw no trace of deception in her face, only a calm, almost otherworldly seriousness. He thought of the millions he'd spent the clinics in Zurich and Boston, the specialists who'd shaken their heads. He thought of the yacht docked at Elliott Bay, a gleaming vessel he'd bought years ago to fulfill that childhood dream now gathering dust because he couldn't even climb aboard. What did he have to lose? A few crumbs, his pride. He'd already lost that long ago. "Fine," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. He pushed the plate toward her, the croissant untouched, except for a single bite he'd taken out of obligation. "Take it. Show me what you've got." Lily didn't smile or celebrate. She simply nodded, as if his agreement was expected. She pulled a small worn cloth bag from her pocket and carefully scooped the croissant into it, her movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. Ethan watched his skepticism warring with a strange curiosity. He glanced at Mason, whose jaw was tight with disbelief, and Clara, whose expression remained unreadable but alert. "Lily," she said, introducing herself as she tied the bag shut. "We start tomorrow. Your house. Be ready." Before Ethan could respond, she turned and slipped into the crowd, her small figure vanishing as quickly as she'd appeared. Ethan stared at the empty space where she'd stood, the bills still lying on the table untouched. His coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. For the first time in months, something stirred inside him. Not hope, not yet, but a spark of intrigue. A question he couldn't ignore. "Mason," he said, his voice steady, a tone Mason hadn't heard since before the accident. "Cancel my schedule tomorrow. All of it." Mason's eyes widened, but he knew better than to argue when Ethan spoke like that. "Boss, you sure about this? She's just a kid. What's she gonna do?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked out at the market where life pulsed on, oblivious to his struggle. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But I'm going to find out." Clara pushed his wheelchair back toward the SUV, the rain now a soft patter against the canopy. As they drove back to Queen Anne, Ethan's mind raced. He thought of the yacht, its sails furled, waiting for a captain who no longer believed he could command it. He thought of Lily's eyes, those hazel depths that seemed to see right through him. And he thought of the croissant now in her bag, a bizarre payment for a promise that defied logic. For the first time since the accident, Ethan felt a flicker of something he couldn't name. Curiosity, defiance, maybe even the ghost of his old ambition. Whatever it was enough to make him want to see what tomorrow would bring. Back at the mansion, Ethan didn't retreat to his study as usual. Instead, he wheeled himself to the glass-walled room that overlooked the Sound. The yacht was out there somewhere in the marina, a symbol of a life he'd thought was lost forever. He closed his eyes and pictured himself at the helm, the wind pulling at the sails, the world open before him. It was a fantasy he hadn't allowed himself in months, but Lily's words had cracked something open. "Give me your leftovers, and I'll teach you how to walk." Absurd. Impossible. And yet, as the rain streaked down the windows, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something new, something that might just change everything. The morning fog clung to the hills of Queen Anne, wrapping Ethan Caldwell's mansion in a soft gray veil. Inside the house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the espresso machine in the kitchen where Mason Harper, Ethan's assistant, was brewing coffee with the precision of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. Ethan sat in his wheelchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, staring out at the mist-shrouded Puget Sound. The events of yesterday at Pike Place Market replayed in his mind like a strange dream. The small girl Lily, her hazel eyes burning with conviction, and her impossible promise, "Give me your leftovers, and I'll teach you how to walk." He'd handed over the croissant, a gesture that felt absurd even now, but something about her had lodged itself in his thoughts, refusing to let go. Ethan, once the master of a tech empire that revolutionized logistics, was no stranger to bold claims. He'd built his fortune on calculated risks, but this was different. This was a leap into the unknown, driven not by data or logic, but by a flicker of curiosity he hadn't felt since the accident that stole his legs 6 months ago. Mason entered the study, balancing a tray with coffee and a tablet. "Your schedule's cleared, boss," he said, setting the cup on the desk. His voice carried a note of skepticism, as if he still couldn't believe Ethan was entertaining this. "You sure about this, kid?" I ran a quick check. Nothing on any Lily, matching her description around the market. "She's a ghost." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding him. "She's not a ghost," he said finally. "She'll show up." Mason raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, retreating to the corner of the room where Clara Voss, Ethan's bodyguard, stood like a silent sentinel. Clara's presence was a constant, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if Lily might pose a threat. Ethan almost laughed at the thought, a 7-year-old girl as a danger. But then again, there was something about Lily that felt dangerous not in a physical sense, but in the way she challenged the walls he'd built around himself. The doorbell chimed at exactly 10:00 a.m., sharp and clear, through the mansion's intercom. Clara moved to answer it, her boots silent on the hardwood floor. Moments later, she returned with Lily in tow. The girl looked much the same as yesterday. Green dress, dark braids, that same unnerving confidence in her step. She carried the same worn cloth bag, now empty, slung over her shoulder. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, her voice calm but firm, as if she were the one in charge. Mason shot Ethan a look, but Ethan ignored it, gesturing for Lily to sit. She didn't. Instead, she walked to the center of the study, her small frame dwarfed by the room's sleek modernity. Glass desk, holographic displays, shelves lined with awards Ethan hadn't touched since the accident. "You ready?" "Lily?" asked, her eyes locking onto his. Ethan felt a jolt, not unlike the one he'd felt in the market. "Depends," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "What's this lesson of yours?" Lily didn't answer right away. She reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of paper, creased and slightly yellowed, along with a stubby pencil. She knelt on the floor, smoothing the paper out, and began to draw. Her movements were deliberate, almost meditative, as she sketched lines and shapes that made no immediate sense, swirling patterns, jagged angles, a web-like structure at the center. Ethan leaned forward, curiosity overriding his skepticism. "What's that supposed to be?" he asked. "It's the system," Lily said, simply not looking up. "Everything has a system. Your body, your mind, the world. You forgot how to listen to yours. This will help you remember." Her words were so matter-of-fact that Ethan didn't know whether to laugh or argue. He glanced at Mason, who was subtly shaking his head, and Clara, whose expression remained unreadable. "A drawing's going to make me walk," Ethan said, his voice edged with the cynicism that had become his shield. Lily paused, her pencil hovering over the paper. "Not the drawing," she said. You have to see it. Really see it." She finished the sketch and slid it across the floor toward him. Ethan picked it up, his fingers brushing the rough paper. The lines seemed chaotic at first, but as he stared, he noticed patterns, repeating loops, a rhythm that felt almost alive. "Keep looking," Lily instructed. "Don't think, just look." Ethan wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but something in her voice stopped him. He stared at the drawing, letting his eyes trace the lines. Minutes passed the room silent except for the faint tick of a clock. The patterns began to shift in his mind, not physically, but in perception, like a puzzle revealing itself. He felt a strange calm, a focus he hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't hope, not exactly, but a sense of connection to something deeper, something he couldn't name. Lily broke the silence. "Now we start the real lesson," she said, standing. "Get out of the chair." Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" he said, his voice sharp. "I can't. You know that." Lily's eyes didn't waver. "You can," she said. "The system's already in you. The chair's holding you back. Get on the floor." Mason stepped forward, his voice low but urgent. "Boss, this is crazy." "You don't have to," Ethan cut him off with a raised hand. "Mason, stay out of it." His tone was firm, the old authority creeping back. He didn't understand why he was listening to this girl, but the memory of her certainty at the market, the way her drawing had pulled him in, made him want to try, even if it was absurd, even if it hurt. Clara moved to help, but Lily stopped her with a small shake of her head. "He has to do it himself," she said. Ethan gripped the arms of his wheelchair, his knuckles whitening. The idea of moving without it terrified him. Since the accident, the chair had been his anchor, his safety. Without it, he was nothing but a broken body. But Lily's gaze was unrelenting, and he felt a spark of defiance. If he was going to fail, he'd do it on his terms. With a grunt, he pushed himself forward, sliding awkwardly onto the floor. Pain shot through his upper body as he caught himself on his arms, his legs dragging uselessly behind him. He lay there, breathing hard, humiliation burning in his chest. "Good," Lily said, kneeling beside him. "Now crawl." Ethan stared at her, incredulous. "Crawl like an animal." He opened his mouth to protest, but Lily cut him off. "Your body knows how," she said. "It's part of the system. You just forgot. Think about moving. Think about wanting to move." Her words were simple, almost childish, but they carried a weight that made Ethan pause. He thought of the drawing, the patterns that seemed to pulse with purpose. He thought of his yacht, the one he'd dreamed of sailing as a boy, now docked uselessly at Elliott Bay. He thought of the man he used to be, the one who never backed down from a challenge. He placed his hands on the floor, the cool hardwood grounding him. His arms trembled as he pulled himself forward, dragging his legs. It was agonizing, not just physically, but emotionally, a billionaire reduced to crawling like an infant. Mason looked away, uncomfortable, but Clara watched intently, her face betraying a flicker of something like respect. Ethan moved an inch, then another, sweat beading on his forehead. Lily walked beside him, her voice steady. "Don't think about the chair. Think about where you're going. Think about the sea." Ethan froze. The sea. How did she know about his dream of sailing? He hadn't told her, hadn't told anyone in years. "Keep going," she said, ignoring his shock. "The system's waking up." As he crawled, Lily began to tell a story, her voice soft but clear. There was a bird once with a broken wing. It fell from the sky and thought it would never fly again. But it watched the other birds, how they moved, how they trusted the wind. It didn't know how to fly anymore, but it wanted to. So it tried. It flapped its broken wing, and it hurt, but it kept trying. One day, it flew again, not because the wing was fixed, but because it believed it could. Ethan listened, his arms burning as he pulled himself across the floor. The story was simple, almost cliché, but it stirred something in him. He imagined himself as that bird, grounded but yearning for the sky. He crawled a few more feet, his breath ragged but determined. By the time he reached the far side of the study, he was exhausted, his shirt damp with sweat. He collapsed onto his side, panting. Lily knelt beside him, her face calm but not smug. "You did it," she said. "That's the first step. You listened to the system." Ethan looked at her, his chest heaving. For the first time since the accident, he felt a spark of something, not hope, not yet, but possibility. He'd moved not far, but on his own without the chair. It was a small victory, but it was his. "Tomorrow," Lily said, standing and tucking the drawing back into her bag. "We do more. Be ready." She turned and left without another word, leaving Ethan on the floor, his mind racing. Mason rushed to help him back into the wheelchair, but Ethan waved him off. "Give me a minute," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. He wanted to feel the floor beneath him, to hold on to this moment. Clara stepped forward, her voice low.
"She's something else, isn't she?"
Ethan nodded, still catching his breath. "Yeah," he said, "she is." As the fog outside began to lift, Ethan looked out at the sound, imagining his yacht cutting through the waves. He didn't know what Lily's system was, or how a 7-year-old could wield such power. But for the first time in months, he felt alive. The drawing, the crawling, the story of the bird. They were pieces of a puzzle he didn't yet understand, but he was ready to keep going. Tomorrow, he'd face whatever Lily had in store, and maybe, just maybe, he'd find a way to sail again. The morning sun pierced through Seattle's heavy clouds, bathing Gasworks Park in a rare golden light that danced across the rusted skeletons of the old industrial structures. Ethan Caldwell sat in his wheelchair at the edge of the park, the breeze off Lake Union carrying the faint scent of algae and damp earth. The sprawling green hills and jagged skyline of the city felt like a world apart from the polished isolation of his Queen Anne mansion. Just 2 days ago, in the confines of his study, a 7-year-old girl named Lily had pushed him to crawl across the floor, guided by a cryptic drawing and an even stranger promise. "Give me your leftovers and I'll teach you how to walk." That small, grueling victory had sparked something in Ethan, A flicker of possibility that hadn't existed since the climbing accident 6 months ago that left him paralyzed below the waist. Now, as he watched kite flyers and dog walkers weave through the park, he felt a knot of anticipation tighten in his chest. Lily had warned that today's lesson would push him further, and Ethan, once a titan of tech who thrived on conquering the impossible, wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. Mason Harper. His assistant stood a few paces away, his fingers tapping nervously on his phone. His skepticism about this entire venture was palpable, his brow furrowed as he glanced at Ethan. Clara Voss, Ethan's bodyguard, leaned against a nearby lamppost, her sharp eyes scanning the park with the vigilance of a hawk. Their presence was a quiet anchor, but Ethan's focus was on the small figure approaching from the gravel path. Lily, her green dress catching the light, her dark braids swaying with each confident step. She carried her worn cloth bag and a bundle of wooden stakes, each about a foot long, tucked under her arm. Her hazel eyes met Ethan's, and she offered no smile, only a direct nod. "We're moving today," she said, pointing to a rugged trail that snaked through the park's hilly terrain, its surface uneven with roots, rocks, and patches of mud. "Come with me." Ethan's jaw tightened. The trail was a nightmare for his wheelchair, let alone for a man who'd only just managed to drag himself a few feet across a smooth floor. "You're serious?" he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "That path's a mess. I can't even—" Lily cut him off, her tone calm but unyielding. "You don't need the chair you moved yesterday. The system's working. You just have to trust it." Ethan's mind flashed back to the study, the strange drawing with its swirling patterns, the way his arms had pulled him forward despite the dead weight of his legs. She was right. He'd felt something, a connection to his body that the doctors said was impossible. But this trail, with its steep inclines and obstacles, felt like a cruel test. Mason stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Boss, this is insane. You could get hurt. Let me stop this now." Clara's gaze flicked to Ethan, her expression neutral but ready to act. Ethan raised a hand, silencing Mason. "I'm doing it," he said, his voice carrying the old authority that had once commanded boardrooms. He didn't know why he was following Lily's lead, a child of all people. But her certainty was like a lifeline, pulling him out of the despair that had defined his life since the accident. "Clara, get me out of this thing." Clara hesitated, her eyes searching his for a moment. Then she moved to his side, her strong hands lifting him carefully from the wheelchair. The grass was soft beneath him as she lowered him down, his legs limp and unresponsive. The sensation of being without the chair was jarring, like stepping off a cliff. Lily knelt beside him, her small frame radiating a quiet intensity. "Stand," she said, her voice as steady as ever. Ethan's breath caught. "Stand." He'd barely managed to crawl, and now she expected him to stand on uneven ground. "You're out of your mind," he muttered, but Lily's eyes didn't waver. "Your body knows how," she said. "It's part of the system. Think about where you're going, not what's stopping you. Think about the sea. The sea." Ethan's mind drifted to the horizon's call. His yacht docked at Elliott Bay, a symbol of the freedom he'd dreamed of as a boy. He'd bought it years ago, planning to sail across the Pacific, but the accident had turned that dream to ash. Yet Lily's words stirred something, a memory of waves crashing, of sails catching the wind. He planted his hands in the grass, his arms shaking as he pushed himself up. His legs, heavy and numb, refused to move. He collapsed the impact, sending a jolt through his shoulders. Lily didn't flinch. "Again," she said. Ethan gritted his teeth, frustration bubbling up. He tried again, his muscles straining as he got one knee under him, his hands clawing at the earth for support. Sweat stung his eyes, but he held the position, his breath ragged. "Good," Lily said, standing and walking toward the trail. "Now walk. Walk!" The word was a challenge, a dare. Ethan stared at the path ahead, its uneven surface taunting him. Lily moved slowly along the trail, her small figure a beacon in the morning light. "Don't think about your legs," she called back. "Think about following me. Think about what you want." What did he want? To walk, to sail, to reclaim the man he'd been before the mountain took everything. He pushed himself up again, balancing on his knees, and dragged himself forward. His legs trailed uselessly, but he moved inch by inch, driven by a stubborn spark of will. Lily stopped at a clearing where she'd planted the wooden stakes in the ground, creating a makeshift obstacle course, small hurdles spaced a few feet apart. "You'll go over these," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. Ethan stared, his frustration boiling over. "You're kidding," he snapped. "I can't even walk. And you want me to climb over those?" Lily's eyes met his calm but unrelenting. "They're not hurdles," she said. "They're steps, part of the system. You have to want to cross them." Ethan's anger flared, but her words echoed in his mind. He thought of the accident, the moment he'd slipped on the icy slope in the Cascades, the sickening crack as he hit the rocks. The memory had trapped him, reinforcing the doctor's prognosis, permanent paralysis. But Lily's voice cut through it, demanding he confront a different truth, not a broken body, but a mind that had surrendered. Clara broke her silence, her voice low and measured. "When I was in the service, I lost half my unit in an ambush. Thought I'd never trust anyone again, never feel whole. Took years to learn I could rebuild myself piece by piece. It's not about the scars. It's about what you do with them." Her words caught Ethan off guard. A rare glimpse into the woman who'd always been a shadow at his side. If Clara, with her guarded heart, could overcome her past, maybe he could face this trail. He turned to the first stake, his resolve hardening. He crawled forward, his hands gripping the grass as he reached the wooden barrier. With a grunt, he pulled himself up, his arms trembling as he dragged his legs over. It was awkward, painful, but he did it. The second stake was harder, his muscles screaming, but he pushed through, driven by the image of the horizon's call slicing through the waves. By the third stake, he was panting, his shirt soaked with sweat, but he didn't stop. Lily walked beside him, her voice steady. "You're doing it," she said. "The system's waking up." At the end of the clearing, Lily stopped and pointed to a steeper section of the trail where the path climbed a small hill. "Run," she said. Ethan laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Run! I can barely crawl." But Lily didn't back down. "You can," she said. "Think about the sea. Think about moving toward it." Ethan closed his eyes, picturing the yacht, its deck warm under the sun, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. He pushed himself up his knees, wobbling but holding. He took a step, clumsy, unsteady, but a step. Then another. His legs felt like lead, but they moved, driven by something deeper than muscle. He stumbled, catching himself on his hands, but he kept going, each step more deliberate than the last. By the time he reached the top of the hill, he was gasping, his body trembling with exhaustion. He wasn't running, not yet, but he was moving faster and farther than he'd thought possible. Mason and Clara followed at a distance, their faces a mix of shock and awe. Ethan collapsed onto the grass, his chest heaving, but a grin spread across his face. He'd done it. Not just crawled, but walked, climbed, moved. Lily knelt beside him, her expression calm, but not triumphant. "You're starting to see it," she said. "The system's in you. Tomorrow we go further." As Lily walked away, her small figure disappearing down the trail, Ethan lay back on the grass, staring at the sky. The clouds parted, revealing a patch of blue that reminded him of the open sea. For the first time since the accident, he felt alive, not just surviving, but fighting. Mason approached, offering a hand to help him back to the wheelchair, but Ethan shook his head. "Not yet," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. He wanted to feel the ground beneath him, to hold on to this moment. Clara nodded, a rare flicker of respect in her eyes. "She's something else," she said. Ethan laughed, a real laugh this time. "Yeah," he said, "and so am I." Tomorrow Lily would push him further, and Ethan was ready. The Horizon's call waited at Elliott Bay, and for the first time in months, he believed he might one day stand on its deck again. The trail, the stakes, Lily's unshakable belief, they were all part of something bigger, something he was only beginning to understand. He was ready to keep going, to break every barrier in his path. The dawn painted Seattle in hues of indigo and gold, the sky clear over Lake Washington, a rare gift in a city often cloaked in clouds. Ethan Caldwell stood on the terrace of his Queen Anne mansion, hands braced on the railing, his legs unsteady but resolute beneath him. 3 days ago, a 7-year-old girl named Lily had walked into his life at Pike Place Market, offering an impossible deal, his leftovers for the chance to walk again. 3 days of strange transformative lessons, staring at a cryptic drawing crawling across his study. Climbing obstacles at Gasworks Park had led him here standing without. The dawn painted Seattle in hues of indigo and gold, the sky clear over Lake Washington, a rare gift in a city often cloaked in clouds. Ethan Caldwell stood on the terrace of his Queen Anne mansion, hands braced on the railing, his legs unsteady but resolute beneath him. 3 days ago, a 7-year-old girl named Lily had walked into his life at Pike Place Market, offering an impossible deal, his leftovers for the chance to walk. 3 days of strange transformative lessons, staring at a cryptic drawing crawling across his study. Climbing obstacles at Gasworks Park had led him here standing without a wheelchair, for the first time since the climbing accident that stole his mobility 6 months ago. The Horizon's call. His yacht docked at Elliott Bay lingered in his mind, a symbol of a freedom he thought he'd lost forever. Today, Lily had promised the final lesson, the hardest yet, and Ethan felt a surge of determination laced with uncertainty. Mason Harper, his assistant, arrived at 9:50 a.m., his usual efficiency softened by a quiet awe at Ethan's progress. Clara Voss, his bodyguard, followed her stoic demeanor, betraying a hint of curiosity. They found Ethan already outside, standing unaided, the wheelchair abandoned in a corner of the terrace.
"Boss, you're up!"
Mason said, his voice tinged with pride and disbelief. Ethan nodded, eyes fixed on the shimmering lake. "She's coming," he said, his old confidence resurfacing. "And I'm ready." At 10:00 a.m., sharp Lily appeared at the garden gate, her green dress glowing in the sunlight, dark braids swaying with her confident stride. She carried her worn cloth bag empty now, and her hazel eyes met Ethan's with calm intensity. "You're standing," she said, stating a fact, not a question. "Good. Today you'll do more than walk. You'll sail." Ethan's breath hitched. Sail. The Horizon's call was his boyhood dream, a 40-foot sloop built for solo voyages across the Pacific, now docked unused at Elliott Bay since the accident. He couldn't feel, his feet couldn't work the pedals, or balance on the deck. "That's impossible," he said, his voice sharp but faltering. Lily's gaze held steady. "Nothing's impossible," she said. "The system's in you. Trust it." Think about the sea. Think about what you want. Ethan's mind churned. The sea was his lost dream, the reason he'd bought the yacht to sail free the horizon boundless. The accident had buried that dream, but Lily's words rekindled it, a vision of wind-filled sails and endless water. He looked at Mason and Clara, their faces a mix of concern and wonder. "Let's go," he said, his voice firm. "To the marina." Clara drove them to Elliott Bay, the SUV gliding through Seattle's morning traffic. Lily sat in the back, hands folded around her bag, her face serene. Ethan stared out the window, heart pounding. The marina emerged, masts gleaming against the water. The horizon's call stood out, its white hull a beacon of his former life. Clara helped him from the car, but Ethan refused the wheelchair, leaning on her arm as he took slow, deliberate steps to the dock. His legs wobbled, but held, fueled by the same will that had carried him over obstacles at the park. Lily boarded the yacht with ease, as if she belonged there. Ethan hesitated at the narrow gangway, doubt creeping in. "You can do it?" Lily said from the deck, her voice cutting through his fear. "Your body's a tool. Your will's the engine. Think about sailing." Ethan closed his eyes, picturing the yacht slicing through waves, sails taut. Gripping Clara's arm, he stepped onto the gangway, each movement a fight against gravity and doubt. Mason trailed close, ready to catch him, but Ethan reached the deck unaided, collapsing into the captain's chair with a gasp. Lily pointed to the controls. "Start it," she said. Ethan stared at the pedals, numb to him. "I can't," he said, voice raw. "My legs don't work." Lily's eyes narrowed. "Your mind does," she said. "Think about the sea. The system's working." Anger flared, but her certainty grounded him. He closed his eyes, envisioning the yacht gliding across the lake, water sparkling. His hands moved to the controls, steady despite his trembling legs. He hit the ignition, the engine humming. A clarity washed over him, bypassing his physical limits. His hands adjusted the sails, steering the yacht from the dock on instinct. The horizon's call sailed onto Lake Washington, wind catching the sails. Ethan's heart raced as the deck shifted beneath him, the water's rhythm, familiar yet exhilarating. He wasn't walking or running, but he was sailing, defying every medical prognosis. Lily stood beside him, her voice soft. "You're doing it," she said. "You're following the system." Ethan laughed, a burst of pure joy, as the yacht cut through the waves. For the first time in months, he felt unbound, free from the wheelchair and the weight of despair. They returned to the dock, Ethan's legs shaking as he stood leaning on the railing. Lily stepped off, bag in hand. "You did it," she said, her tone calm but final. "That's the last lesson. You know the system now. Use it." Before Ethan could speak, she vanished into the marina's crowd. He called after her, but she was gone, leaving him with gratitude and unanswered questions. Weeks later, Ethan's search for Lily led to a small wildlife sanctuary outside Seattle, where volunteers used donated food to care for injured animals. He drove his sports car there alone, its roar out of place in the rustic setting. Inside, he found Lily feeding a wounded hawk, her hazel eyes meeting his with calm recognition. "You found me," she said, unsurprised. Ethan knelt beside her, legs stronger but still unsteady. "Who are you?" he asked. "How did you do this?" Lily smiled faintly. "I'm just a key," she said. "My mom taught me. She's the system." She pointed to a woman tending a deer across the sanctuary. Nora, Lily's mother, had kind eyes and a quiet strength. Ethan approached her, heart pounding. "You helped me," he said. Nora shook her head. "You helped yourself. I showed you the way." It's psychosomatics. Your mind controls your body. You were blocked, not broken. Lily unlocked you. Nora explained her method, a psychological system using symbolic acts like giving leftovers to break mental barriers. The leftovers, she said, fed the sanctuary's animals, tying giving to receiving in the system of belief and action. Ethan was floored, not magic, but science, reprogramming his mind to awaken his body. "I want to help," he said. "I can build a place for this for people like me." Nora's eyes softened. "Not for money," she said. "For purpose. Help those who've lost their way." Ethan returned home, his mission clear. He sold most of his tech empire, keeping just enough to fund his vision. Within a year, he opened the Human Potential Center in Seattle, a serene complex of gardens and warm spaces, not a hospital, but a place to learn to believe. Its first patients, scarred physically and emotionally, arrived, guided by mentors trained in Nora's system. Ethan watched them take their first steps toward new lives, new purposes, and felt a joy deeper than any corporate victory. As he stood on the center's terrace overlooking Seattle's skyline, Ethan understood the lesson woven through Lily's teachings. Life's greatest obstacles are often in the mind, not the body. By embracing belief, willpower, and a clear purpose, anyone could overcome their limits. Ethan had lost his legs, his empire, his old self, but gained a mission to guide others to their own paths. The horizon's call waited at Elliott Bay, and one day he'd sail it again. For now, his purpose was here, helping others discover their own systems, their own strength. This journey taught Ethan, and through him, us, that true transformation begins within. It's not about external fixes, money, medicine, or machines, but the courage to believe in ourselves and pursue a purpose that lights the way forward. The Human Potential Center became Ethan's legacy, a beacon for those lost in darkness, proving that with faith in our inner strength we can chart any course no matter how impossible it seems.